On the third day after I ran away from my marriage, my fiance committed suicide in the bridal chamber and left all his inheritance to me. When I was sorting out his belongings, I saw photos of me all over the wall and bloodstains on the ground. His assistant told me, "Mr. has liked you for many years. His depression is very serious, and only by seeing you and thinking of you can he feel a little better." Every single incident was frightening, suffocating, and inexplicably sad. So when it came time to do it all over again, faced with my childhood sweetheart's plan to elope, I refused with a smile. "I'm not leaving. I want to see how stupid the man who loves me so much is." Charlie died on the third day after I ran away from my marriage. My father and brother told him apologetically about my running away from marriage. Just as he walked out of the manor, he received the news that Charlie had committed suicide by cutting his wrists. He died despite rescue efforts. In the will that was prepared long ago, all the property was left to me. I was far away in North America when I received a call from my brother and my expression gradually stiffened. In my eyes, Charlie was a bastard who suddenly showed up to force me to get married, and I had never met him before. But everything seemed as if he and I had been in love for many years. I hurried back to China at the request of my lawyer and took Charlie's urn stiffly. "His background is a mystery and he has no relatives," the assistant told me softly, looking at the square box with sorrow. "Sir has liked you for many years. His depression is very serious, and only when he sees you and thinks of you can he feel a little better. I thought that after you married him, he would no longer be so pessimistic, but I didn't expect." His voice stopped and there was no blame in it, but my heart was inexplicably gripped. The assistant handed me a key. "This is the manor that the gentleman prepared for you." It was also the new house that he decorated himself. The place where he committed suicide. The manor is very large, with a racecourse built on the green lawn. The style is my favorite royal blue, and the furniture and decorations are all to my liking. There is a room inside that is filled with photos of me. I looked carefully and found that I had been under this man's camera almost every moment since my sophomore year in college until now. There were blood stains on the ground from the cut wrists, with a slight fishy smell. Every single incident was frightening, suffocating, and inexplicably sad. I couldn't help but get angry again. He likes me, why doesn't he say it? He broke into my house like a robber and asked for marriage proposal as soon as he opened his mouth. How could I feel at ease to marry him? Now that he is in such a miserable state, do you want me to feel guilty and blame myself so that I will never forget him for the rest of my life? You're dreaming. I donated all my inheritance, including that villa. The photos on the wall were torn down by the cleaning lady and thrown to the ground at random, covered with blood stains. Charlie's short and legendary life has completely disappeared from this world. It took me 3 days to accept the fact that I was born again. 3 days ago, Charlie came to my house and demanded a marriage, using methods that could be described as intimidation. When my childhood sweetheart heard about it, he told me to run away without hesitation and go to North America to avoid the limelight for 2 days. In my previous life, I did just that. And in this life, I thought of the photos covering the wall and the horrific bloodstains on the ground, and shook my head calmly. "I don't want to leave," I said. "I want to go find him and ask him clearly why he wanted to marry me. Charlie has a very big business." I went to find him. He was still in a meeting. His assistant came down to pick me up personally and asked me to wait in the office for a while. "The boss will be here soon." I nodded softly. Charlie came very quickly indeed. Before he had even finished his cup of tea, he came hurriedly over, fastening his loose cufflinks as he walked. When she saw me, she stopped and called out calmly, "Miss Amy." His expression was cold and distant, as if he was looking at a stranger. I was speechless at his indifference. After thinking for a while, I asked him softly, "Mr. Charlie, my father said, you want to marry me, why? If you want to marry, just marry. No reason is needed." How do I answer this? She stood up slowly, picked up her bag and said, "I'll leave first then." Charlie's expression changed slightly, and he showed a rare look of surprise on his face. "Leaving now?" I looked at him expressionlessly, and his face gradually turned pale, and he looked full of self-abandonment. But he still made way for me to go out. If I wasn't sure that this person liked me, I would really think he was teasing me. I sighed and took the initiative to step forward and grab his sleeve. "How about we have a meal together?" Charlie's assistant was terrified by the way I interacted with him. When I left, the assistant kept apologizing to me. "Boss, he is not good at chatting with girls, Miss Amy, please don't be angry with him." "I'm not angry." I smiled and told him, "I quite like him, his looks are very much my style." The office door was not closed. Through the small gap, I clearly saw Charlie touching his face with a dazed look on his face. I smiled slightly and said to my assistant. I have an appointment with your boss for dinner tonight. Remember to remind him so he doesn't stand me up. The assistant nodded hastily, as if I would regret it in the next second. I walked out of the company door in high heels. As soon as I went out, I received a call from my childhood sweetheart. Looking at the call marked with Brother Kevin, I hung up calmly and looked at the clouds in the sky with an empty mind. Kevin is very nice to me and really cares about me. But whether it is childhood sweetheart or friend, they will eventually be lost in the long journey of life. Just like in the previous life. He had a lover and children and learned to avoid suspicion with me. So even when I was trapped in the mountains with the exploration team and called him, my wife mocked me and called me an old woman who could never get married. When his wife scolded me, Kevin was beside her, silent. I ended up dying there, and I don't know how he would feel about that. Charlie came very early in the evening and the dining atmosphere was very cold. I tried hard to find topics to talk about, but he was like a topic terminating machine and was not interested in anything I said. I felt a little tired and put the knife and fork heavily on the table. Mr. Charlie, you make me feel that you don't want to start a family with me. Charlie's Adam's apple rolled and he bowed his head to apologize. Sorry. You know, that's not what I wanted to hear. I am really helpless. You have been in charge of the company for so many years, and you have almost never failed at the negotiation table. Your insight into people's hearts should be flawless, but now it's like this. It makes me feel that you are not interested in me. Charlie's face was a little pale, his fingertips were tightly pinching his palms, and blood was faintly visible. Don't think too much. He said, I just have never been so close to you before, and I'm a little uncomfortable. I was surprised by his sudden words that sounded like a confession. His nervousness and loneliness, as well as the bloodstains on his palms, did not seem fake. I suddenly remembered what his assistant said in his previous life, Mr. Y's depression is very serious, and he only feels a little better when he sees you. Mr. Charlie. I suddenly became very curious and asked him directly. Did we know each other before? Charlie's thin lips trembled, his eyes dodged subconsciously, and he turned his head to face the transparent glass window of the restaurant. Known. When? I asked again, but Charlie kept his mouth shut and refused to say anything no matter what. I was quite bored and started eating my steak instead of trying to find any topics to talk about. Charlie didn't say anything and didn't seem to feel that there was something wrong with the atmosphere. He just stared at my lips and neck blankly, his eyes moving down along the red wine he swallowed to his throat, but he couldn't move because of his upbringing. I glared at him. He turned his head in panic, his face was a little pale, and his lips were accidentally bitten, revealing bright red blood. I am helpless. If you want to see me, just watch it directly, don't be sneaky. We're getting married soon, Mr. Charlie, can you please do something honest? He took so many photos of me, had so many people watch me, and even seemed to have bribed my nanny. If he hadn't died so tragically in his previous life, I would have called the police and reported him as a pervert. But his assistant also said that Charlie was sick. We should be more patient with patients. I took the initiative to hold his hand, ignoring his momentary stiff expression, and used a tissue dipped in water to gently wipe the blood off the palm of his hand. Your hands are so beautiful, please stop pinching them, okay? Charlie didn't answer me, but just stared at my eyes for a long time, then asked me in a low voice. Are you willing to marry me now? You gave me an option I didn't want. His Adam's apple rolled, actually, if you don't want to, you can also run away from marriage? Or find you, point my finger at your nose and scold you, saying that I will never marry you? I stared into his eyes. I have no problem doing this, but Charlie, what about you? The result is obvious. He will die. In my previous life, I never figured out how weak and incompetent a person must be to not even dare to meet his or her spouse, and to end his or her life so casually based on a piece of news of an escaped marriage. But I just couldn't bear his death. Charlie is undoubtedly a genius. He has a sharp eye, but his life experience remains a mystery. His rivals have tried to dig deep but still failed to uncover his background. They can only watch him seize the opportunity of the internet and rise rapidly. Amidst the lively conversation and laughter, the old families in Jiangcheng were put under a lot of pressure. But such a man committed suicide for a woman at the best moment of his youth. In his previous life, Charlie became a laughingstock among the world and was dubbed the love-brain person. With deliberate hype from his rivals, he was cursed as harshly as he could. I don't want this to happen again. On the way home, I let my mind go blank and thought about a lot of things. Finally, looking at Charlie driving with a blank expression on his face, I decided to talk to his assistant in a couple of days. I really don't know how to get along with this guy. And his illness. Is there really no solution? A black Rolls-Royce stopped at the door of my villa, and by coincidence, I met Kevin, who was carrying some pastries. Charlie's eyes narrowed. Do you want to go down and say hello? I tilted my head and asked him. Kevin is my very good friend. Charlie leaned over and unbuckled my seatbelt. Go home. Although I said no, my heart suddenly turned cold and felt bitter, as if I had swallowed Coptis chinensis. I grabbed his wrist. He and I are really just friends, don't think too much about it. Won't. Really not? I turned my head and saw that he was gripping the steering wheel tightly, with veins faintly visible. Reached out and touched his fingertips. What's the matter? Can you tell me? Don't keep it in your heart, it will be very troublesome to get along with others. Charlie was forced by me, his Adam's apple rolled, he turned his head to look away, and spoke slowly. I don't like him very much. Then just don't get along with him. I patted his head encouragingly. He is just my friend, you don't have to force yourself to like him. Moreover, we will be husband and wife in the future, and our relationship will be many times closer than his. If you mind my relationship with him, I will be more careful in the future and keep my distance from him. Charlie was a little surprised. Will you stay away from him for me? Why not? I looked at Charlie with a smile and whispered, we are husband and wife. Charlie was stunned, feeling inexplicably dazed. I struck while the iron was hot and walked up to him and told him. You see, things can only be solved if they are spoken out, right? If you are dissatisfied with me or have anything you want to say to me, please tell me. Don't keep it in your heart and make yourself angry. I didn't know anything about it. What a pity. I could kind of sense that Charlie didn't know how to handle intimacy. He applied the negotiation tactics he used in business to his relationships, forcing my family to form an alliance, and then was at a loss as to how to respond when I approached him. He's a bit scary when it comes to emotions. It doesn't matter. I thought, I can teach him slowly. Kevin looked at me getting out of Charlie's car, his eyes narrowed, and his expression was slightly unfriendly. The car drove away and Kevin walked up to me. Have you decided to marry him? He is handsome, rich, has a good reputation in the circle, and has no scandals. Why not marry him? But... He stopped talking halfway. He was a little flustered, a little confused, a little angry, and a little impatient, and finally uttered a few dry sentences. Are you sure you like him? In this circle, how many marriages are based on love? I shrugged, he fits the bill. Kevin's eyes widened, he can still have both of us. Kevin. I interrupted him with a cold face, I'm getting married, so please don't say certain things, as they may cause misunderstandings. After saying that, I walked home without paying any attention to him. To be honest, even if I lived my life again, I still don't understand Kevin's attitude towards me. When things are going well, he's super nice. He'd even run all over a small town in Northern Europe to buy me a necklace. It's really bad when it's bad. I still can't remember my birthday. In my previous life, I proposed marriage to him and was rejected. He said he wanted to play for 2 more years. As a result, when making a snowman in St. Petersburg, he fell in love with an innocent and lovely girl at first sight, and they got married and had a child in less than 3 months. His wife was very bothered by my presence, and I knew better than to contact him. But I didn't expect it to be a farewell forever. Kevin will probably be a little sad when he learns of my death. After all, when his biological father and stepmother slapped him because of his younger brother, it was me who sat with him on the rooftop and counted the stars all night. When I went to see Charlie the next day, he was still in a meeting. Through the transparent glass window, I could see his serious expression with his brows furrowed, and the suit he was wearing also had a bit of aggressiveness to it. I waited in the lounge and chatted with his assistant. The assistant was very tight-lipped and kept beating around the bush with me. Even when I pointed out his illness, he played deaf and dumb and pretended not to know. I am helpless. Don't you think that explaining it to me would be best for his condition? Mr. K doesn't want you to know. He said, he hopes to be perfect in your eyes forever. He told me meaningfully, the gentleman really hopes that you can rely on him. What are you talking about? Charlie came in after the meeting. He was tugging at his tie as he walked, looking a little tired. You are so beautiful, have you ever had plastic surgery? I leaned on the sofa and looked at him with a smile. But your assistant said no, that's a pity, I can never catch up with Mr. Charlie's bone structure. Charlie was stunned. The assistant had already left and closed the door. The lounge was extremely quiet. I could hear the rustling of Charlie's suit fabric. His voice was hoarse. Do you like this look? Is this something surprising? I raised my eyebrows. Could it be that Mr. Charlie has no awareness of his own beauty? There was a slight redness behind his ears, and he turned away in embarrassment, no longer looking at me. By the way, is it too unfamiliar for me to still call you Mr. Charlie? I walked up to him and touched his head. It should be because of some hairspray, it feels dull, not very good. I leaned down and leaned close to his ear. Can I call you brother? Charlie pushed me away. He suddenly became angry. I couldn't understand why he was angry, just as I couldn't understand why he liked me. He sat behind his desk with his back to me, his voice filled with hostility. Go away. But I still want to have dinner with you. No. Charlie refused me without hesitation. I have something to do at noon. What is this guy doing? I looked at him for a few times and said slowly, okay, then you should pay attention to the time and you can't miss meals. I walked out with my bag and waited outside the door for a while. Amid the assistant's nervous expression, I heard the sound of something being smashed and Charlie's painful growl. I deliberately left the door open. His painful and desperate roar came out along with the sound of breaking glass. I knocked on the assistant's desk in front of me with a serious expression. Are you still going to tell me nothing? He hesitated, but I ignored him and pushed the door open and walked in. Charlie became extremely embarrassed. Huddled in a corner with my knees hugged, sitting on a piece of broken glass. There was blood on my fingertips, and I didn't know if it was caused by myself or the glass. I walked over the broken glass. The high heels rolled over the hideous broken particles, making a harsh rustling sound. Charlie lowered his head in panic, his body trembling, and refused to look at me no matter what. I stroked his shoulder with my fingertips. What's wrong with you? He was too big and too heavy. He was over 1.80 meters tall and I couldn't even hold him in my arms. I could only squat beside him and carefully pick up the broken glass from my palm with tweezers. Charlie raised his head and stared at me. After a while, he said to me hoarsely. Ugly, isn't it? What? Your hand. I was stunned for a moment, staring at the slender fingers in front of me with only a thin layer of flesh, and couldn't help but mutter how lacking in self-awareness this person was. Looks very good. I had no choice but to bend down to his fingertips and kiss them gently. It looks really good. Charlie still wasn't very happy. He asked me, did you say the same thing to your exes before? What? Please me, be nice to me, call me, brother. Have all your exes received these treatments? I was strangely silent. It turns out this guy just went crazy because of this. I thought he had a younger sister in his family, which was why he was so irritated by the word brother. After all this time, it turned out that he was just having a love affair. How could such a strong and powerful person be tortured so badly by love? I touched his head and sighed softly, fool. I have dated quite a lot of people. After all, I am good-looking and have a good family background. Many of them pursued me, and it is inevitable that I would be attracted to some of them. But in a family like ours, dating and getting married are different. My father told me a long time ago that I could date as much as I wanted, but when I reached a certain age, I had to get married properly. I helped him stand up and sit on the sofa. I asked the cleaning lady to come in and clean the floor. I poured him a glass of warm water and busied myself with the process. Charlie held my hand. You don't have to do these things. I sat down under his force, thinking in a daze. This guy should have found out how many ex-boyfriends I have. I used to love playing and did a lot of ridiculous things, so I can't do anything if he minds it. Don't contact them again. Charlie's abrupt words interrupted my thoughts. I turned my head to look at him, and seeing that he looked serious, I reached out and scratched his wrist. Are you ordering me? His body suddenly tensed up, his breathing became shallow, and he turned his head nervously, as if he suddenly realized something. If you want to contact me, please tell me in advance, otherwise I see. I interrupted him, I won't contact them again. Then I asked him, were you so angry just now because of my ex? Charlie didn't say anything. I feel a little helpless. If there is anything, please tell me. I am really tired of you. You don't say anything, get angry for no reason, throw things, and I don't even know how to comfort you. So all your exes did better than me, right? Charlie suddenly interrupted me, his eyes were bloodshot, and he questioned me in a childish tone like a little kid. How did things come to this? I obviously wanted to have a good chat with him. I straightened up and asked him helplessly. If you mind these things, there's nothing I can do about it. I don't think having a few relationships is against the laws of heaven. What's past is past, why are you dwelling on it? Mr. Charlie, would it really make you happy to get to the bottom of this matter? Okay, let me tell you, I did talk to them, and when I talked to them, I liked them sincerely. Do you feel happy hearing this? Charlie's eyes became redder and redder, and he was almost about to cry. When he saw me stand up, he anxiously tried to pull my sleeve, but I gently brushed him away. The voice was also a little confused. I once thought that as long as I cooperated with you, we could get along well. But now I realize that I can't adapt to your way of thinking at all. Looking at his red eyes, she slowed down her tone. You didn't feel happy when you were with me, and you even hurt yourself. Charlie, why don't we break up? No retreat. Charlie looked at me firmly, raised his red eyes, grabbed my arm tightly, and repeated it over and over again. Do not cancel the engagement. My face was very close to his, close enough to see the fine hair on his cheek, and coupled with his pitying tone, it really felt like I was bullying a child. I ruffled his hair with an empty mind and asked him again. So tell me, why on earth did you want to marry me? Charlie's eyes flickered and he subconsciously tilted his head, and I pinched his chin. Tell me, Charlie, brother, tell me. I stared at him intently. I don't want to be a fool who knows nothing. His eyelashes trembled and his voice became hesitant. I want to marry you. Why do you want to marry me? His eyes were filled with tears and he looked at me, blinking, as if begging, yet unable to speak. I said it for him, you like me, right? Silly boy, what's wrong with that? I rubbed his cheek and tried to stand up, but he grabbed me and pressed me down on the sofa. His originally docile skin was torn apart, and he hugged my shoulders and cried quietly. He said, I'm disgusting, right? It's annoying that a disgusting person like me likes you, isn't it? I looked at him in disbelief. What is going on in this guy's mind? Is he disgusting? Is he annoying? Doesn't he know that he is at the top of the list of the most desirable men to marry on the internet? How could someone like him be so self-deprecating? I seemed to have a glimpse of something. I held his face and forced him to look up, wiping away the tears from the corners of his eyes. When my friends knew I was able to marry you, they were all very envious and said that I had accumulated 8 lifetimes of luck to be able to marry you, but why did it become such a shameful thing for you? He buried his head in my neck and shoulder and didn't say anything. But I didn't cry anymore. I patted his back and sighed slightly. Brother, can you please have more confidence in yourself? The 32-story office building is your property. Anyone who sees you outside will disrespectfully call you boss. You are so beautiful, isn't it normal for me to fall in love with you? Charlie's body trembled, and he asked in a low voice with a little disbelief. Do you like me? Otherwise, do you think a girl who comes to you every day is just bored and has nothing to do? I patted his back and told him gently. Brother, girls won't waste their time on someone they are not interested in. You should also have more confidence. You are good, really good, and we will be good in the future. Believe me. Charlie started crying again. Tears soaked my collar, warm and a little numb. You can't lie to me. Not lying to you. My heart softened as I gently touched his earlobe and felt the wetness and heat on his neck. And the heart is pounding. Maybe it's because among all my exes, I have never had anyone like him. He's very new. I think. Charlie's core is too fragile. Just one word, or one attitude from me can easily make him collapse. This kind of behavior should not appear on the boss of a listed company. But the truth is so bizarre and absurd. He stood up awkwardly, his cheeks flushed, but his expression was cold as usual. He looked at me and asked softly, Are you hungry? A little bit. I stood up, straightened my messy collar, and pulled it down to cover the exposed part of my waist. Charlie's face turned away, as red as a ripe apple, which made me feel sympathetic. So innocent? This guy is almost 30 years old. It's impossible that he hasn't done anything yet, right? I suppressed my inner speculation and lazily made my request to him. Please ask your assistant to pack it up and bring it up. I don't want to move. Can. Charlie went out to tell his assistant something. I looked at his tall figure in the backlight, stretched out my hand to measure the length of his legs, and felt that his proportions were extremely good. She is good-looking and has a good figure. She is rich and doesn't promiscuous. If it weren't for her mental problems, she would never have come to me in her entire lifetime. I sighed. A big part of Charlie's poor mental state comes from insomnia. His assistant told me with great shame that Charlie slept with my photo in his arms for many nights. I didn't ask him where he got the photo. The assistant was relieved. When I returned to Charlie, I stared at him working for a long time. His ears turned red and he could hardly concentrate. Put down the document in your hand, does it look good? I nodded subconsciously, and after a while, I remembered my business. Can I come and see your family's new house? Charlie was stunned. Why do you suddenly want to go there? I want to go and see it. After all, it is where I will live in the future. He never refused my words, so he just nodded and added. If you are not satisfied with anything, please tell me. Walking into that elegant and noble manner again, my eyes couldn't help but become moist. It's bright here, with the sun shining in obliquely and shining on my body, making me feel warm and comfortable. Unlike the previous life, it was so cold and gloomy that made people want to escape. I glanced quietly at the locked room on the far right of the second floor. I knew that there were photos of me in there, and some of the paintings he copied. It was obviously my face, with a black mole at the corner of my eye. I followed Charlie into the bedroom in silence. The bed was covered with bright red sheets and quilts with a big diamond ring worn on the hand. Standing by the bed, I felt like laughing and crying at the same time. Finally, I pulled Charlie's sleeve and asked him, "Do you really want to marry me?" His Adam's apple rolled. "What's wrong with you?" "No, everything is good." I pulled him to sit on the bed. "When did you start preparing?" "In recent days." He skillfully stretched out his fingers and let me play with them. He was so obedient that he was hopeless. Because of my protest, he no longer uses hairspray, and his bangs light softly on his forehead, making him look less sharp and gentler. The next room was where he committed suicide in his previous life, and blood was splattered all over the floor. And now, he was holding me, with his chin resting on the top of his head, his expression gentle and contented, like a well-fed beast lying lazily on the lawn basking in the sun. Has his fate been changed by me? The wedding date is approaching. I went to see him every day and stayed until very late. My father scolded me several times for being unreserved. Charlie seemed quite happy. I ate more, gained a little weight, and my skinny fingers gained a few more pounds of flesh. One time, I was about to go look for him, and I saw Kevin waiting downstairs of the company. He grabbed me right away and said, "You have been bewitched by him, I will take you away, let's go to North America." "Are you crazy?" I shook him off in disbelief. "You can think whatever you want, but I can't let you go on like this." Kevin gritted his teeth. "You don't like him, Amy, you are just novelty, you can't risk your whole life on this. What does it have to do with you whether I like him or not?" "I find it strange, don't you think you're meddling too much?" Kevin opened his bloodshot eyes, and his face was suddenly filled with sadness. He seemed to have suddenly lost all his strength and begged me in a very low voice. "How about we get married, Amy? You can't just abandon me like this." He looked disheveled, as if he had been beaten. His suit was wrinkled and stuck to his body. He begged for my mercy in panic. I remembered what my best friend told me in my previous life when Kevin got married. If you were the one who got married first, he would definitely go crazy. Love at first sight is simple and cute, but how can it compare to the friendship between you and him? He just took advantage of the fact that you had no interest in men in recent years and he was your only friend of the opposite sex, so he was so unscrupulous in his love affairs. "Kevin." I called out to him with a complicated expression and raised my hand to pat the dust off his shoulders. "Go back. I will pretend I didn't hear what you said today. I'm getting married. From now on, you should be more careful, otherwise people will misunderstand me and it will be hard to explain." He stared at me in panic, and then, tears fell. Murmuring softly, "If I just miss it for a moment, is there no room for turning back? We are friends." I answered him with the same words he answered me in my previous life. "If you want, we can be together all our lives." When I pushed the door open, Charlie was sitting on the sofa, feeling very depressed. "Why are you so late today?" I met a friend downstairs and chatted for a while. I put the snacks I brought on the table and turned to see that he still had a gloomy look on his face, which was a bit strange. "What's wrong with you?" Charlie looked up at me, his voice somehow sounding aggrieved. "How was your chat with Kevin? How do you know?" I wanted to ask him how he knew that, but then I remembered the people he had put around me and felt it was unnecessary. I told him the truth. He came to me and said he wanted to take me away. Charlie's eyes flashed sinisterly. I patted his shoulder, leaned against him, and said lazily, "But I rejected him, I said I wanted to stay with you." Charlie said oh slowly, "Don't you want to praise me?" He turned his head away. "What's there to brag about? I expressed my loyalty to you in front of other men." I pinched him in dissatisfaction and pretended to be angry. "How can you not show any expression at all?" Charlie's Adam's apple rolled and he looked at me blankly. After a while, he stood up and took a box from the drawer. When it was opened, it turned out to be a huge blue crystal necklace. "It looks familiar to me, is it the one from the Hong Kong auction?" I burst out laughing. The necklace is very nice and valuable, but Charlie spent 300 million on it. The news headlines that night were all, "The sucker who spent 300 million on a necklace. Why buy this? You like blue." He whispered, "I think it suits you very well." Thank you, brother. I hugged his neck and nuzzled his cheek. The auction has been going on for 2 months, why are you taking it out today? You are unhappy today. He whispered, I was planning to give it to you on your birthday, but I thought you could be happy now. When I don't. I remembered what I had just said in a pretended angry tone and shut my mouth, finding it a little funny. This guy really can't tell the difference between a girl being angry and pretending to be angry. I poked him in the face. I'm not mad, really, but I'm still happy right now. Brother, I really like you more and more. Charlie's cheeks blushed slightly. He held me on his lap and kissed my forehead carefully. To be honest, apart from that time when he lost control, I didn't really feel that Charlie was ill. When facing me, he was just a normal guy who was a little slow in emotions and didn't quite understand girls. But his assistant reminded me again and again not to provoke him. I couldn't help but ask, has his condition gotten worse these days? No. The assistant said hesitantly, the gentleman's mood has actually improved a lot, and he no longer needs sleeping pills at night. Then why do you keep bothering me? The gentleman becomes better because of your proximity. If you get tired of him and leave, the consequences will be really serious. He begged me, I don't know what made you approach the gentleman, but please, don't just go there casually, the gentleman will really go crazy. We'll die again. I added to his thoughts in my mind. I patted his shoulder, don't worry, I care about him more than you do. I am not a savior, nor am I a professional psychologist. I can only do my best to make Charlie feel less sad. I think he could be happier. If you are in a good mood, other places will be fine. I was a little surprised when Charlie's father came to me. After all, this was the first time I had heard of his family. His father was from Beijing. He wore the same suit and had a similar face to him, but a completely different temperament. He is so sinister that it scares me. Right off the bat, tell me straight out. Ms. Amy, I hope you leave my son. I was a little confused after hearing that, so I picked up the teacup, drank some water, and asked calmly, how much money can you give me? 200 million is enough for your family to survive this crisis. I paused. I actually didn't know there was a crisis in my family. He looked at him calmly for a moment and said decisively. We are true love, so we have to pay more. The necklace Charlie bought for me cost 300 million US dollars. Your price is not enough to make me excited. He sneered, do you think it's a good thing to stay with him? Look at me with a sneer. You haven't been in contact with your ex-boyfriends, right? Go and find out how many of them are still alive. And that Kevin, do you think Charlie will let him go? And your brother, do you think it's okay, just because he's related to you by blood? I tell you, Charlie won't let him go just the same. The love between you and him is so great. All the people around you are suffering, but you are kept in the dark by him like a fool and know nothing. Isn't it ridiculous? I frowned, disgust filling my eyes. I believe Charlie. He is not that kind of person. Is that so? You can find out if you check. He smiled confidently. It is said that a son resembles his father. The methods I used on his mother will definitely be returned to you by him exactly as they were. Do you believe it? Then Madame Ling should not be with you now. No, on the contrary, we are living a happy life now. He smiled, looking pleased with himself. She couldn't escape, so she accepted her fate. She still had family members alive, so she couldn't bear to leave everything behind and walk away. She is very well behaved and obedient now, waiting for me at home every day. Soft, gentle, with all claws and sharp edges cut off, it has been tamed to the point where it can only depend on me, as obedient as a bird in a cage. I woke up suddenly. It was just a dream. The north wind blew against the window glass, breaking my daze. Only then did I realize that my back was covered in cold sweat. I have never met anyone as disgusting as Charlie's father in my life. The thought of his complacent theory of domestication makes me feel sick and want to vomit. It's still afternoon and I've taken a nearly 3-hour nap. When I turned on my phone, I saw 16 missed calls from Charlie. I called back, but before I could open my mouth, I was interrupted by Charlie's urgent voice. Why don't you answer my call? You met him, didn't you? What did he tell you? Do you not want me anymore, want to leave, want to cancel the engagement, want to break up with me? Stop guessing. I had no choice but to interrupt him, I just fell asleep and didn't answer your call, don't think too much about it. Charlie was silent, his breathing was a little heavy, and after a while, he said to me in a wrong tone. Amy, I'm scared. The voice was so sad and pitiful that it made me feel overwhelmed with sympathy. Don't be afraid. I sighed, although he is your father, he is just a stranger to me. I still trust you more, do you understand? Charlie didn't answer me, but said in a very soft voice. Amy, I want to see you. Charlie came to my family to pick me up. As soon as I got in the car, he pulled me over and held me on his lap. He hugged me tightly, buried his head in my neck and shoulders, and begged in a crying voice. Don't believe him, not a single word he says. I patted him on the back and replied concisely, you are the only one I trust. Charlie looked up, tears stained his eyelashes. With my training, he can now express his emotions in front of me very freely. Whether you feel aggrieved, sad, or anything else, you should tell me instead of keeping it in your heart. Just like now, he said sullenly. Could you please not meet him again in the future? I'm really scared today. When you don't answer my calls, I feel like I'm really going to die. Don't say this word. I covered his mouth and said, you will live a long life. Charlie's emotions were interrupted and he was stunned for a moment. I rubbed his head, the corners of my lips curled slightly. If you don't want me to meet him, then I won't. Anyway, it's because of you that I met him in the first place. Brother, you should be more confident in yourself. I held his hand and said, I don't believe a word of what others say about you. I only believe what I see and hear, and what you tell me. You are really an excellent person, brother. You are very good. You must be more confident. Do you understand? Charlie has low self-esteem. I don't know what he went through in the past that made him so inferior and timid, especially in terms of emotions. He was always as anxious as a headless fly and felt that he was not worthy of anyone's love. These days, I praise him whenever I get the chance, from his looks to his knowledge, from his wealth to his status, and even when I see his fingernails I say they are exceptionally cute. Only if you are confident enough, you won't be like a frightened bird, living in constant fear all day long. I hope Charlie can feel relaxed and happy in this intimate relationship. Instead of being tense all day, wondering whether I will be angry and how to please me, how tiring that would be. Brother, I am an adult now and have my own judgment. I will not change my opinion of you just because of a casual remark he makes. I leaned over and hugged Charlie's shoulders. I like you and I have a mouth. If you have any questions, I will ask you and I will never leave. Besides, you are so outstanding, I don't want to give you up and let others get you for nothing. There was a gleam of light in Charlie's eyes, as bright as diamonds. Compared to when I first met him, he is now significantly less cold and more humane, no longer like that rotten wood that could die at any time. My existence finally had a real impact on him. I can probably guess that Charlie's original family made him very miserable. But I was still a little surprised when he hugged me and whispered that he didn't like the name. He hated me for coming between him and my mother, so he gave me this name and hoped that I would die soon. Charlie, is the sun setting? Ever since he was born, his father wanted him to die. How could there be such a person? My heart felt bitter and I held his hand. But your mother loves you. She doesn't love me. Charlie smiled bitterly and said, she was just tripped by me. She is different from you. She is a very traditional woman. Even though she has received higher education, she still stubbornly believes that women should take care of their husbands and children. After I was born, all her resistance became empty. She couldn't leave me because of her sense of responsibility, but she couldn't provide me with a sufficient material life by herself. So she was forced to accept her fate. When he said this, his tone was flustered and confused, and his eyes were red and watery, as if covered with a layer of mist. It makes me feel a little sad. But this is not your fault. You shouldn't have to bear the consequences of the actions your father has taken. Feeling the warmth of his chest, I told him seriously. Brother, you are great and outstanding. Your mother must be proud of you now. Charlie smiled bitterly. He touched my head, only you will always think well of me. So Amy, you're all I have. He hugged me tightly, rested his chin on my head, and begged me seriously. You must not leave me, or I'll go crazy. When I opened my mailbox and saw the pile of harassing emails, I had a moment of wanting to meet that person. How much hatred must he have to make him so unable to tolerate his son's happiness that he is determined to destroy it? I took a deep breath. The content of the emails was mostly threatening, or they would attach photos of my exes, saying how miserable their current situation was, and then earnestly advising me to stay away from him. I deleted the emails without even reading them. I've been preparing for my wedding recently, and I've been so overwhelmed by the guest list on my family's side that I've had less contact with Charlie. So in the evening, when I received the anxious call from his assistant saying that he had committed suicide, I was unable to react for a moment. After a while, the whole person felt like falling into an ice cave. Charlie had just met his father before he committed suicide. I don't know what that man said to him, but it irritated his fragile nerves. As soon as he left, Charlie cut his wrists. Fortunately, it was discovered in time. At the door of the emergency room, I squatted on the ground, holding my shawl, leaning against the wall, and my teeth couldn't help but chatter. How could there be such a father? He must have known that Charlie's mental state was fragile, yet he did not hesitate and cruelly pushed him to death. When Charlie was pushed out, there was water hanging from his hands and his face was pale. The good complexion that I had worked so hard to build up over the past few days was completely destroyed. I sat on a chair beside the bed, staring at him blankly for a long time until he woke up. As soon as he woke up, he saw me and called my name in a hoarse voice. Amy. I ignored him, got up and went out to call a doctor. After the doctor took away the 4-drip, I stood by the bed, staring at his pale face in silence, which scared him. He said anxiously, "If you are unhappy, just scold me or hit me. Don't do this, Amy, don't ignore me." He seems to be very afraid of cold violence. Every time I put on a stern face and ignored him, he would panic like a child and pull my sleeve and beg for forgiveness. But this time, I'm not going to go along with him. I ignored him for the entire day and watched him lose himself in confusion and self-abandonment. The scar on my wrist was hideous and had been broken several times by him, and it continued to bleed. Even the doctor couldn't help but advise me, consider the patient's mood first. I know. I whispered, don't worry. Back in the ward, Charlie stared blankly at the window. He was too fragile and frustrated, like a body without a soul. Charlie. I stood 3 meters away and called him softly, without any emotion in my tone. He seemed to realize something, closed his eyes in pain and refused to answer me. But I ignored his evasion and told him directly. Let's call off the engagement. Snap. The vase on the bedside table broke. His expression was ferocious for a moment, then quickly turned into decadence and extreme despair. He called me hoarsely, Amy. He used his hands and feet to try to climb down to find me, and the wound on his wrist was torn again, and blood gushed out. I walked up to him, held his wrist, and touched his messy hair. What do you want to do now? Would you lock me up like your father did and tame me to listen to you, or would you rather hurt yourself than touch me? Amy, Charlie raised his head and looked at me in panic like a little animal. I answered for him. You would choose the second one, right? I leaned over and kissed him on the lips without a hint of lust, and when I pulled away, I pinched his cheek with my fingertips. Brother, you are different from your father, and I am not your mother. We will not end up like them. Brother, Charlie, dear, baby, what are you afraid of? I felt like I could get a glimpse into his father's psychology a little bit. He knew that even if Charlie's mother accepted her fate and followed him obediently for the rest of her life, she would not be happy at all. This marriage was far from as happy as he had imagined. So he couldn't bear to see Charlie's happiness. Charlie got the love he wanted so easily, which made him feel like a failure and even angry. He kept telling me that Charlie was his son and would do the same shit as him. Charlie has also been brainwashed. I watched the surveillance video, and before he left, the last words he said to Charlie were, "Son, just wait and see. As long as you are alive, sooner or later, you will not be able to help yourself and will treat her the same way I treat your mother. By then, your mother's present will be her future." Seeing this, I laughed sarcastically. It turns out that this person also knows that Charlie's mother, his wife, is miserable, so miserable that if other girls repeat her path, they will become useful threats. Charlie doesn't want me to be his mother. He didn't want to hurt me, and he hated the dirty genes in his own body. Under the stimulation, he chose to end his life without hesitation. Do you feel the difference between you and him? I squatted beside the bed and looked into Charlie's eyes very seriously. When he learned that your mother had left, he would force, threaten, and even imprison her, doing all sorts of despicable things. And you will only hurt yourself. I grabbed his good right hand and interlocked our fingers. Brother, do you think you will hurt me like this? Charlie's Adam's apple rolled, his eyes turned red, and he looked at me sadly. But I'm afraid, Amy, you're so good and so proud, I'm afraid you'll become like my mother. We don't. I told him again, brother, we will be very happy in the future. Human beings are essentially nothing more than birds of prey, and they all have the most primitive and ugly desires. What is valuable is that they can be suppressed and controlled. You thought you might hurt me one day, but you controlled the thought and would rather commit suicide than touch me. Brother, believe in yourself. Human beings have evolved for so many years and are no longer the wild beasts that eat raw meat and drink blood in the forest. I looked into his eyes. Please believe me too, okay? I am not your mother, and I don't have any concept of the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. I am willing to stay with you only because I like you very much. Amy. Brother, I repeated it and told him very seriously. Please believe me. I've dated many people and have long lost interest in relationships. I also hate those arrogant and misogynistic men. If I hadn't met you, I probably would never have fallen in love. Just like in the previous life, I died alone on the road of adventure. I talked too much when I was young, and then everything seemed boring. Until I met Charlie. He really respects me and is very obedient. In front of me, he is as docile as a civet cat without self-awareness. From the pity in the beginning to the admiration now, everything happened so naturally. There is no girl who doesn't like him. I made an appointment to meet with Charlie's father. In the cafe, I looked at the man in a suit and tie in front of me and asked him softly. I heard that your wife used to be a diplomat. He is very powerful and heroic on the stage of international affairs. He narrowed his eyes. Why are you talking about this? But now, she can only stay at home and be a housewife. Her body is getting bloated and her thoughts are getting poorer. She can't keep up with the times, which makes you feel disgusted. Only at this moment do you realize that the one you love and the one who makes you moved is just her who is full of vigor and vitality, not this crazy woman who is nagging at home and making people annoying, right? Shut up. He wanted to interrupt me. I didn't listen, I just told him with a smile. Unfortunately, it was you who created this tragedy. I don't know if he has a lover, but judging from his appearance, he must have one. The love that was once so passionate eventually dissipated in the torture of family chores. I guess he must have regretted it too. Why, after everything went as he wished, nothing seemed perfect anymore. Let Charlie go. I whispered, he is already very miserable because of you and your wife. You shouldn't vent your own resentment on him. If you still insist on not changing your ways. I smiled slightly. Mr. Charlie, I am polite to you now only because you are Charlie's father. If I find out you're trying to hurt him, I won't let you go. He was not angry. Instead, he slumped on the stool, looking a little dazed. I said what he wanted to say for him. Are you thinking, if your wife had been half as tough as I was, you wouldn't have ended up like this? You are wrong. If I meet someone like you, the final outcome will be that both of us will die together. Mr. Charlie, with a personality like yours, any girl will be miserable if she falls into your hands. I irritated him. He stood up suddenly and raised his hand to hit someone. I was stopped by the bodyguard next to me and started fighting with him. It's really embarrassing that a 50-year-old man was pinned to the ground and beaten by bodyguards. I smiled softly, looked at him, and repeated what I had just said. Mr. Charlie, I've said it before, I'm not your wife, nor am I a soft persimmon that you can bully at will. Let me repeat it to you again. Don't come near Charlie. Otherwise. I poured a cup of scalding coffee on his head. I will never let you go. Although I do not agree with fighting violence with violence, I have to admit that violence can indeed solve many problems. Jiangjiang is still the territory of an old aristocratic family. He can't beat me, so he can only disappear completely with hatred in his heart. After the wedding with Charlie, he held me in his arms and rolled around on the wedding bed like a little child, smiling a little silly. Amy, Amy. He murmured in disbelief, I finally married you. Fool. I patted him on the back unhappily. You drank so much, go take a shower. He went into the bathroom with a silly grin. I changed into the lingerie I had bought especially for our wedding night and got into position on the bed, waiting for him. I have to say, compared to Charlie, I'm really good. The first moment he saw me, his eyes lit up and he roared like an uncivilized dog. I was exhausted, but he was still in high spirits. He came close to me and kissed me softly. While kissing me, she called me baby with a silly smile. I fell into a deep sleep. That night, I had a very bad dream. I dreamed about Charlie's past life. After I ran away from my marriage, his father came to provoke him and said to him smugly, You see, you'll soon be tempted to capture her and lock her up like I did to your mother. Don't hide it, you are a greedy madman by nature. What your mother is like now will be what she will be like in the future. She will be driven crazy by you. I saw Charlie holding his head in pain, growling over and over again, lying in the room full of my photos, with a ferocious face, repeating no. He doesn't want to hurt me. So he resolutely chose to end his life. The dream was awakened and my back was covered in cold sweat. When I opened my eyes, Charlie was holding me, sleeping peacefully. I touched his handsome eyebrows and got up from the bed. Standing in front of the locked room, I stole his bunch of keys and tried them one by one. The door opened. I stepped into a room that was almost a nightmare. Charlie's suicide was probably a result of self-destruction caused by the disgust for his own genes under heavy pressure. He looked at the wall of my photos, blood gushing from his wrist, feeling the passing of life, his eyes caressing my smiling face inch by inch. At the last moment of his life, all he had in his eyes was me. I remembered the hot searches in my previous life. There is nothing wrong with being number one on the love brain list. Until now, I still don't know where Charlie's love for me comes from. He didn't want to tell me. Even after I asked him many times, he still refused to say. Maybe there should still be some secrets between husband and wife. He didn't want to talk, so I didn't ask. Amy. Looking back, Charlie, who was originally sleeping, was standing behind me against the light. He was a little lost and asked me nervously. Do you think I'm a pervert? I shook my head and walked over to hold his cold hand. Why did you wake up? You are not here. He felt so wronged, the quilts were all cold. I couldn't help laughing out loud. When we first met, he looked cold and distant, and didn't know how to respond to what I said. And now, he has become very skilled at acting like a spoiled child. No matter whether it is a child or an adult, as long as they are favored, they will naturally reveal the coquettish demeanor of a child. He reacted, shook my sleeve again, and asked me cautiously. Do you think I'm a pervert? No, it's just a little bit novel. I'll tell you the truth, I didn't expect you to have liked me so early. Don't you blame me? You like me, why blame me? Charlie's cheeks turned red and he put his arms around my waist. You're so nice to me. Will you indulge me no matter what I do? I just believe that you won't do anything to hurt me. I turned around and put my arms around his neck. I believe in your character. I don't want to assume any malice towards someone who would rather hurt himself than touch me. True love is not easy to come by in this world, and mutual love is even rarer. I cherish Charlie's feelings very much, just as he cherishes mine. A cub that has been favored will go crazy without hesitation if there is a risk that the favor will be taken away. Just like now, Charlie's attitude towards Kevin. It took a lot of effort for me to stop him from throwing away the gift Kevin gave him. Kevin gave me a set of pajamas that he knitted himself. There is a small heart embroidered on the chest, showing tenderness and ambiguity. Charlie wanted to go crazy when he saw me, but when I glared back at him, he sat on the sofa with a wronged look on his face. I ignored him and picked up the pajamas to look at it. What's there to see? He muttered as he came over and hugged me. The big body enveloped me, and the warm breath hit my neck. I was a little dissatisfied, but dared not say it out loud. I could only shout softly, "Wife, it's okay." I held his hand with a headache and stuffed the pajamas into his hand. You deal with it, don't throw it away, otherwise it would be so embarrassing if he finds out. So Charlie cut it into pieces as if to vent his anger. I watched in silence for a moment and couldn't help asking, do you have a grudge against Kevin? He paused and hummed in a muffled voice. I have always disliked him. Even though he was so close to you, he was still entangled with other women and was not loyal at all. He has a girlfriend, so I should have a boyfriend too. Charlie's double standards made me want to laugh, but I felt it was inappropriate, so I held it back. It doesn't matter now. I chuckled and comforted him, now that I am with my brother, he can't get in the way, right? Charlie blushed completely, turned his head away from me, and hummed softly. I didn't actually go out of my way to treat his depression. Just treat him as a normal person, try your best to make him happy, coax him like a child, and give him enough sense of security. He naturally got better. I made up for all the inferiority and sensitivity brought to him by his original family. He became more and more dependent on me. In addition, he became more and more confident. The assistant talked to me. In fact, I always feel that it is not a good situation for a boss to attach his personal emotions to others. But there is really no way, he might just be love brain. He didn't dare say these 3 words, and I didn't help him to finish them. It's enough for him to understand them. Actually, I feel bad too. His spiritual core is others, not himself, so if anything happens to me, his spirit will not be able to support him to continue living. I sighed, but there is no such thing as having the best of both worlds in life. Since I accept him, I should also accept the diversity of human character embodied in him. I don't want to force him to change anything. In a normal intimate relationship, both parties should gain spiritual pleasure and enrichment rather than painful changes. I hope he can be happy. As for the rest, they are all trivial matters. On our 3rd anniversary, I found out I was pregnant. Charlie was very nervous and a little depressed, so anxious that he couldn't sleep. I couldn't help but ask him what was wrong. He hugged me and said sadly and pitifully, "Wife, I'm afraid I won't be a good father. If I can't raise the child well, will you blame me in the future?" "Won't." I touched his head, "You are always more important than your children. Children born in a family like ours will definitely not starve to death. How they grow up and live in the future depends on themselves. Brother, we are the ones who are meant to be together for life. His eyes were wide open, and he wanted to say something, but he couldn't speak. After a while, he said in a muffled voice, "Wife, you are so weird." Maybe. After East Asians have children, they always regard themselves as burning candles for their children and spend their entire lives paving the way for their children. I don't want this. Life is only a few decades long. It would be boring if you don't live for yourself. Charlie and I are a little different. He wanted to have a family so badly. In his impression, a gentle wife and obedient or noisy children are the best vision of happiness. In fact, I think you do very well. I told Charlie, everything you longed for in your childhood will be given to you by your child, and you will treat him well. And the process of treating the child well will, in turn, heal his sad and unhappy childhood. That's why I am willing to give birth to this child, for him. Charlie hugged me and whispered, "You are the most important. I just want a baby. I will definitely treat him well, very, very well." I smiled and said to him, "I believe it. I believe he will be fine, happy and live a long life. I will accompany him and watch him achieve success and live a happy life. We will have a very good future." Charlie never told Amy that he first met her in the stinky ditch behind the high school campus. He was so dirty and smelly at that time, and was almost dying of hunger, so he crawled into the trash can to look for food. Then I met Amy. At that time, she was like a fairy, wearing a white dress. She stood at the entrance of the alley and looked at him calmly for a moment, with pity in her eyes. She took out $2,000 from her pocket and gave it to him. "Find something else to do." The girl's voice was gentle. "Don't do something that you don't like." Charlie didn't know why she was helping him. Maybe it was out of sympathy or pity, or maybe he was simply passing by and was bored. All he knew was that Amy saved his life. He used the $2,000 to buy a ticket to another city, worked day and night, and relied on his great talent for stock trading to catch the last train of the internet. When he returned to Zhongcheng, he was already dressed in a suit and tie, and was surrounded by a large number of think tanks. Amy had grown into a beautiful young lady. She changed her boyfriend every 2 months on average and lived a very extravagant life. Charlie wasn't surprised. He felt that a lovely and beautiful girl like Amy was born to be like this, to be held in the palms of a group of men's hands. But he will also be sad. Perhaps it was the filthiness and shamelessness in his genes that always gave him a beast-like urge to rush over, lock her up and force her to death. This is not right. He was also trying to restrain himself. The result of restraint is mental tension. He suffered from severe mental illness. Going to Amy's family to force a marriage was his desperate decision. He longed so much to hug that godly girl, and the loneliness tortured him so much that he almost died. But if Amy didn't want to, he wouldn't force her. He didn't want to become a shameless person like his father. Later, the girl took the initiative to rush into his arms. Charlie feels that this life is worth it. In the 6th year of their marriage, their child was 2 years old. Charlie dreamed about his past life. He died in that cold, dark, gray, gloomy room. He saw Amy placed a beautiful rose next to his body. That night, Charlie smoked all night on the balcony. He looked at the bright moon in the sky with bloodshot eyes. It was round, just like the mooncake his wife made last year. Charlie felt a little sad. If his wife had run away from the marriage, then his death should have been a natural thing. Charlie, who is emotionally normal, cannot imagine his extremism and despair during that period, but he thinks it is quite normal. There is nothing a mentally ill person can't do. And my wife has never run away from marriage in her life. What's wrong? Amy put her arms around his waist and rubbed him. "You seem to be in a bad mood since this afternoon." Charlie felt a little aggrieved and wanted to act coquettishly to his wife, but when he opened his mouth, he didn't know what to say. My father and brother told him apologetically about my running away from marriage. Just as he walked out of the manor, he received the news that Charlie had committed suicide by cutting his wrists. "He didn't," she exclaimed, and subconsciously wrapped her legs around his thin waist, and couldn't help but pat him. Rogue. Charlie's cheeks turned slightly red, and he rubbed Amy's neck for a long time, but then he felt there was no need to ask. Amy doesn't like him talking about the past. She always said, "I want to live a good life in the future." So he didn't want to worry about it anymore. No matter what, she will be by his side throughout her life. He said with a smile, "I love you so much, wife."